Welcome back, guys. Surprise! Welcome to In the Pit, a new show for Rumble the Mist Entertainment. I will be your host, Chris Stolle, and joining me is host of Misery Point Radio, Mr. Michael Peacock.
Whoa, what is up? In the pit!
In the pit! Or I add the special effects. In the pit!
Oh, there you go. Throw that delay on there.
That's all the effect I got on this mixer. It's terrible.
You need a board op.
Yes, I need a... Hey, donate to Patreon. It's right down below. I need a board op.
Awesome.
No, but basically, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. And quite honestly, talking with Mike and setting up for him to do the Breaking the Fourth Wall interview and setting up for me to come onto his show really lit a fire under my ass to say, you know what? I want to talk music too. And it's kind of ironic because today we weren't supposed to talk until I forget when we set up for your show.
End of the month.
End of the month. And I don't know. Like, I was screwing around with stuff for Realm of the Mist, and I had Bon Jovi on in the background. Behind-the-scenes stuff of Bon Jovi, like his induction to the Hall of Fame and shit. And I was like, instantly I just grabbed my phone and messaged Mike. I'm like, hey, you want to do Fourth Wall, and in turn, you want to have a conversation about music?
Yeah, like right now?
Yeah, I just feel like doing it. You know? So... basically, I'm making an excuse for this. Might be a little rough around the edges for a first episode because it was literally spur of the moment. But for future references, when this releases as its own independent podcast, it will be a little bit more structured. But really, we're just going to sit here and talk music.
Well, I'm honored to break the cherry of this show. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's a pitted cherry.
In the pit.
In the pit. But so yeah, definitely. Again, we from the interview, which by the way, thank you very much for joining me on that. That was awesome.
Oh hell yeah!
But again, like you have followed music since basically your whole entire life. What were some of your influences? You know, for the style of music that you played.
Well, I think it's important to differentiate that there was influences in the sense of getting into music in general, and then there was influences in the sense of playing music, right? And they sometimes there was a crossover, and sometimes there wasn't. But I was big as I was a kid. I was really into kind of the early 80s heavy metal. I mean, I was born in 75. And, you know, my dad was into, like, classic rock and stuff like that. So, I mean, he had, like, Black Sabbath and, like, Pink Floyd and, you know, like, The Who and Jimi Hendrix and, you know, kind of all that, you know, British invasion rock, plus, you know, some pretty cool, like, Southern American rock, you know, Skinner and stuff like that, as well as, like, you know, Paul Simon. So I was a big fan of all that stuff. And then I had a friend in elementary school who had... I remember he had a poster of Dio, the Holy Diver album cover with the fucking, it was just crazy. I just remember going, wow, that's just really awesome. And so I started listening to Dio, and then I started listening to Maiden, and then he was constantly showing me all these bands, you know, Metallica at that time. I was Kill 'Em All, was their first release, and I was really into Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning. And so I really, you know, when I started listening to music, I would say that I was really into kind of like the early rock, you know, kind of that stuff, and then I got into like heavy metal at an early age. And then when I started playing music, I really was more into like the virtuoso kind of stuff, you know, like your Satrianis and Steve Vais and stuff like that. And then as I got better at playing, I wanted more and more and more extreme, more and more heavy. But I was also in that transition time, I was really big into the glam, man, like the hair metal. I love Rat. I fucking love Rat. Twisted Sister I fucking love Twisted Sister. And Rat was just so awesome. You know, and I liked like Poison and fucking Motley Crue and Skid Row. You know, I liked all that shit, man. And it's really funny because even now that I'm really into like death metal and stuff, like, it's a guilty fucking pleasure. Like when one of those songs, like if Round and Round or like Lay It Down comes on the radio, I'm fucking listening to it, you know?
Right.
And I remember when I was in 6th grade, we were in gym class in elementary school, and the teacher said, hey, I'm going to let you bring one of your tapes Because we still had tapes back then. And you can bring a tape in, and I'll play it during PE class while we're like running around the gym and doing exercises. And so I brought in Slippery When Wet,
Nice.
Bon Jovi, and they played it, and I hadn't thought about it, but there's that song Social Disease,
Yes,
right? And at the beginning of that song, it's people fucking. And I forgot that was there, And so we were running around the gym doing all of our shit, and then all of a sudden that song comes on, and people just stopped what they were doing. It was like, that record scratch sound, like everything stopped. And then I got kicked out of class, and I had to go to the principal's office, and I didn't get my tape back. And then they called my parents, and they showed it to my parents, and my mom was super fucking pissed, and my dad was like, whatever.
You got to share that story with Bon Jovi. You ever have him on?
Yeah. Well, next time Bon Jovi comes to my house, I'll be sure to remind him about that. But so I was into all that stuff, and it's kind of like, it's fun to make fun of it because it was super glammy, and everything. But then you also have to realize at that time, even the bands that were heavy, like Venom and Slayer and Judas Priest, they all kind of look like that. So there was like the girly shit. I mean, there was like super girly stuff, like Cinderella and like Pretty Boy Floyd and stuff like that. Faster Pussycat, Hanoi Rocks, yeah. So, and then there was like that look, but that was kind of carried over into kind of more of an evil sounding thing, And Twisted Sister, I think, like Dee Snider, he was the perfect kind of harbinger of what was to come, because he kind of really crossed genres. He was kind of this metal rock and roll dude, but he kind of looked like a chick, but he looked like a burly chick. So he's kind of nasty and fucked up looking, and kind of took that element of glam, but made it more like horror glam. And so I was really just into that stuff. And if you listen to stuff on just the music without the imagery in your head, it's completely different. My friend's a band called Gwar. Have you heard of them?
Oh, I know Gwar. Yeah, I've been to Gwar shows.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, fucking Gwar shows, man. You get covered in like blood-covered semen, and they're shitting all over you, and their shows are crazy. But I mean, if you just listen to the music, it's really well performed music with awesome, melodic guitars and everything. So part of what made that glam era so crazy was, it was at that time MTV was really in its heyday. In the videos, it was all about the videos, and it was the look and the theatrics and kind of all that stuff went together. So a lot of times that even transcended the music. You'd have these musicians that were mediocre at best, but they just had that look that they capitalized on, So, and then now if you go and you see or hear those bands that used to look like that, they don't look like that anymore. It's like a bunch of fat 50-year-old white dudes in their fucking jeans and wife beater t-shirts, That's that's pretty much what they look like now.
Well, it's funny you kind of paint that in that light, because one of the topics that I wanted to discuss tonight was glam rock, but and its influence in music today, and the fact that it was a serious genre of music.
Oh, for sure.
The 80s glam rock scene, but you're right. It was a victim of commercialization. But it's funny that in its own right, and you mentioned with Twisted Sister, and I laughed. You saw me laugh when you were mentioning bands like fucking Faster Pussycat.
Yeah.
That even in glam rock, it had its own sub-genres of musicians, because you had your radio safe bands like Cinderella and Poison and the like, White Lion. But then you had bands that, quite honestly, like, you think, Social Disease was a bad song to play at a gym in an elementary school. Pick anything from Faster Pussycat or Jackal.
Oh, yeah. Jackal. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned White Lion, too, because, White Lion was that band that they were all actually quite accomplished musicians, and Vito Bratta is, in my opinion, one of the best guitarists that ever picked up a guitar. And at the height of their popularity, he quit the business. Just quit, up and quit, moved to Italy, took care of some family business, never fucking came back, right? And he might have come back to the States, but he never came back to the business, wouldn't do interviews, wouldn't do press, wouldn't talk about it. And to this day, from what I understand, if you ask him a music question, he's kind of a dick about it. He's like, dude, that was so long ago. He's like, I haven't done that in years, you know? So I always thought that White Lion was kind of that band that was kind of on the verge of really creating their own style of music. I really actually liked that band. At least the first album I thought was pretty awesome. I think it was called Pride. The second album I don't think I gave two shits about, but that first album I thought was really good.
Well, I give them credit. On the second album, I think it was the one where they did the cover of Radar Love by Golden Earring. And,
they did, yeah.
And I thought that was a great cover. You know, the problem is I can't think of any other song on that second album.
That's exactly it. There's no memorable songs on it. It's not that they're bad, you know, but they don't stand out on their own right. You know, you can't think of, you know, when I think of White Lion, I think of like Wait, right? That being the quintessential song, and then they had that uber ballad, When the Children Cry, that had that really awesome 12-string. Which I learned how to play, and I fucking bragged about that forever, that I could play that song. And that was a pretty awesome badge of honor. Everybody was calling me a pussy, but I could play that, and I could play Wanted Dead or Alive, you know, so on the 12-string. And I just thought I was the shit.
I was always scared of 12-string. I don't know. I know it plays like a 6-string, but I was always scared of it. I'm like, it's six more strings.
There you go.
Sounds great, but it scares me. But no, and that was something I wanted to discuss because it does have such a bad reputation. But like when I sit down and I listen to shows on like Sirius XM, for example, there's a channel devoted to the 80s hair band movement, 80s and 90s hair band movement called Hair Nation, and I sit there and I listen, and you know they play the programs, and they play Rat, they play Poison, they play Queensryche, they play you know Motley Crue, and you know you're just sitting there, and it's like you said, you take away the imagery of spandex and hair Aquanet, and you really start to break down the fact that these guys were hella talented musicians. And there were some really, really strong songs that came out of that era, some of which never got radio play. Like, you know, one of the best examples I can give, that comes to my mind is like everybody knows Great White. And they obviously they know the song Once Bitten, Twice Shy, came off of the Twice Shy album. That's like their uber hit. But to me, the greatest song that came off of that album was The House of Broken Love, which was just a slow, bluesy, you know,
I love the guitars in that song, and I actually really liked the Angel song, and I transposed all the piano music and learned how to play it on the guitar. Nice. And that was one of the first songs I ever played as a solo artist, and I fucked it up, man. I just butchered it. It was terrible. So I learned it, and I could play it, and then I thought that would translate into me being able to play it live, which sadly was not the case. But yeah, House of Broken Love had that really, really, really awesome, very bluesy feel to it. And then they also did a cover of Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which is a Zeppelin song.
Right.
And that is probably the best Zeppelin cover I have ever heard. And I guess I never really got into Great White in general, but they had those select few songs. I always thought that Mark Kendall was a really underappreciated guitarist. I thought as far as guitarists go, he was kind of like Vito Bratta. He kind of sat in the background. He really avoided the limelight. Great White, everything was all about Jack Russell, which is really funny because, you know, that's a fucking dog, right? And Jack Russell. So
was his haircut, by the way.
And then, and then, of course, they had that tragedy, you know, a few years back where they were playing that club, and they had some bad pyrotechnics, and they caught the club on fire, and people died. And that was pretty much the end of Great White, because it was deemed to be the fault of their crew. And I mean, it sucks to place blame on it, you know, but ultimately it was determined that they weren't supposed to. There was a no pyrotechnics clause at the club, and they did it anyway. Right. You know, and the club, as it turns out, was also partly at fault because they weren't up to fire code. So they had two negatives going against them at that show, and the fucking Cosmos said, "Today's the day, motherfuckers. This is it. We're gonna call in these chips." And it was just a sad day, and they never recovered. And then I think, I don't know, was it Jack Kendall, one of the Great White guys, died in that show too?
I think so, yeah.
So yeah, it was just a sad thing. But I did like a select few songs from them. The Once Bitten album, I can't think of a single song off that I can even remember. So, yeah, so it goes.
I mean, I'm kind of the same way. Like, like I mentioned Queensryche, for example, as an example.
My favorite band of all time, by the way.
Queensryche?
Of all time. Absolutely.
I love them, but I'm going to say something that's kind of to the Queensryche fans is kind of heresy. I actually prefer Empire over Operation Mindcrime as far as an album is concerned. Yes, it was a little bit more radio friendly, but I thought the songs were a lot deeper.
Yeah, Mindcrime is my favorite album of all time, but I absolutely love Empire, and I thought that Empire had more. Mindcrime was really a story, right? And if you didn't listen to the whole thing and learn the whole thing and commit the whole album to memory and really dig into it, you didn't really get the most out of it. The songs wouldn't have made sense to you. They weren't designed as singles, right? They had some singles that were good and they did okay, but when Empire came out, especially that song Empire was very anthemic. It was a super powerful song. They had an awesome mix. Jet City Woman, written about Jeff Tate's wife, was a pretty awesome song. And of course, anybody in Seattle, Jet City is a nickname for Seattle. And of course, we have the airports and the Boeing airstrips, and people like to go and look at the jets take off and things like that.
Right.
So that was a great song, and Another Rainy Night Without You. And Della Brown, which I think is a really, really, really awesome kind of a half ballad, but it's kind of a social commentary. So I definitely think that album, aside from Mindcrime, is probably my next favorite album. But I do like to also go back to the old stuff, because the old stuff was really, Mindcrime ended the metal era of Queensryche, and they really kind of. Empire had some metal vibe to it, but they really kind of backed off. But the first couple Queensryche albums, super thrashy, really fast guitars, shredding face-melting solos. And then, Empire kind of marked the turning point. But it was also that because I'm a huge Queensryche nerd, that's really after that album, they started to have internal band struggles. And as a result of the power struggle, that's really when you started to see things, sadly, fall apart. Major issues between Jeff Tate and the other, Mike Wilton and Chris DeGarmo. The songwriting teams, they became factioned. I wrote this song, you wrote that song, and then in the music business, the money and recording is made by who gets the songwriting credit. Okay, so if you play on an album but you don't write any of the songs, you don't get the same amount of money. So it turned into a business fight, and then there was a whole big mess, which we could do an entire episode just on that, and I won't bore you to tears with that story.
No, that's fine.
But needless to say, yeah, Empire is a fantastic album, and I don't fault you, my friend. We may not be on the same page as far as that goes, but I'm right there with you. I mean, it's kind of depends on what you listen to Queensryche for, and I'm a huge fan of concept albums. I love a story. So, Queensryche, and then even the Tommy from The Who, and then, all the King Diamond stuff, with Abigail and all that kind of stuff. It's just so awesome.
Oh, yeah, I've got nothing against concept albums. I mean, one of the all-time greatest albums, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions was a concept album. That's Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I don't know. There's just something different. Like you mentioned a lot of great songs off of Empire. Of course, you forgot Silent Lucidity, which was like their mega hit off of that album. But
that was the mega hit. Honestly, though, not my favorite.
No, not the favorite, but it was a mega hit. But quite honestly, what made me, I'll tell you, the first track was the one that made me say this was the better album because of how different of an opening it was for an album. And that was Best I Can.
Yeah.
And not only was the sound completely different, like you said, they kind of strayed away from the heavy metal aspect and went more, I don't know what the correct terminology would have been, but just the tonality of the lyrics, what the song was about, how relatively dark it was, with yet still being a inspirational song. In its own right, was just like, wow, this is some other level writing.
It's funny you mentioned the inspirational aspect because that song got licensed to a bunch of commercials and a bunch of causes that use that as kind of their vehicle. And They had the chorus, and I won't let go, and it was very uplifting, and I think that's probably the only song of theirs that I think of all their albums really has that message. Great song, and I love the guitar work in that song too. So, really, really catchy, great opening for sure.
So I mean, but as far basically the conversation that I wanted to have here was like looking back, even listening to the radio, and again, like you said, not watching the old music videos, not seeing the old press photos, but just listening to the music and the genre that it was. I'm of the opinion that especially in today's music scene, not just rock and metal, but just music in general, I wonder if glam metal, the hair bands of the 80s and 90s, if they never existed in the 80s and 90s, and if they came out today, would they have the same influential impact that they did back then?
I don't think so, because it was a transitional time, and right now isn't really a transitional time. I think that they would probably still be respected. Like if as a case in point, like Bret Michaels is still around doing stuff, but he's doing his own thing, right? He's not playing that stuff anymore. He's kind of gone almost more country, kind of more rock Americana stuff. And so I think if you strip away the imagery and you get down to just the musicianship, it's all solid, but I don't think it will make a comeback. So I think that if it had not come out in that time frame, I think that you might have not seen some of the like more power metal-y bands, like we'll say Dream Theater or stuff like that. Maybe would have Fate's Warning, might have taken a different approach to things. But the new wave of British heavy metal, like your Maidens, your Dios, all that kind of stuff, was still around, and the sound was relatively similar. So the sound of glam really didn't have as much of an identifier as like the British heavy metal or the power metal or things like that. It was kind of on that verge of rock and heavy metal. So it was influential because it was kind of a stepping stone. But now if it came out and there's already heavier stuff out there, it would really be more like I don't want to listen to heavy stuff, so I want to take a step back. But then if you're going to take a step back, now you're back into Maiden and you're back into Dio and you're back into some of that kind of stuff. So I think it would still be good, and I think it would still be accepted, and I think it would still be popular, but I don't think it would be influential.
Well, the reason I asked that question, and again, like I said before, even doing this this conversation, I was watching a behind the scenes of bands like Bon Jovi, and from my own research, Bon Jovi's like the standard for glam metal as far as it's still existing. The fact that he's getting ready to release another album this year, is unprecedented for a band that, from his own words, shouldn't still be around. But he found a way to reinvent himself.
He did without his core members.
Without his core, even with the core members. I mean, he went through the transitions after the Keep the Faith album. And some things hit, some things didn't, but either way, he's kept himself relevant. 100 million albums, sold. The guy's now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, that's not bad for what was considered a fad in the 80s as far as the glam rock is concerned. But what brings me to it is, like, outside of people like Bon Jovi who reinvented his music and his style to keep himself relevant in the modern times, you look back and just out of all the bands that are still working, and there are still some from the 70s. I know Maiden still goes out on tour once in a while, and AC/DC when they have Axl Rose up front because Brian can't hear no more.
He's back, by the way.
Yeah, I did hear he was coming back. These guys are still out there, but for the most part, like you said, the new wave of British heavy metal 70s, early 80s bands have all kind of fallen by the wayside. Then you think about, like you were talking about with the grunge acts and the modern alternative acts, a lot of them have disappeared that were the trends and fads. But for some reason, whether they've reinvented themselves or they're still just living off of their greatest hits, the glam bands haven't really diminished. They're still out there. They're still putting out albums and still touring.
There are, and it's the nostalgia factor, I think, that kind of keeps them going. And, they're not they're not necessarily gaining new fans as much as retaining old fans, I think. And I use like Bon Jovi. I think is a good example. I mean, Bon Jovi now versus Bon Jovi 30 years ago it's you wouldn't even know it was the same band, right? If
Right.
you didn't already know about them, you would listen to those songs and not even think. Even his voice sounds different. The way he sings and the kind of stuff he writes. Actually, kind of reminds me of like a John Cougar Mellencamp, but with a heavier edge, right? That's kind of what Bon Jovi reminds me of.
I would have said,
but
more
now,
Tom Petty, but yeah, I would have gone more Tom Petty, but yeah, I could see what you're talking about.
So, I think that a lot of those bands that are around, like AC/DC, they're great bands, but sure, at some point, these guys have been around for so long, it's not their new stuff that people give a shit about. It really isn't. Like, there could be a new AC/DC album tomorrow, and people would buy the hell out of it. But, if you went to an AC/DC concert and they didn't play, fucking, Back in Black, or they didn't play, fucking even Jailbreak from back in the day, all those stuff that's the bane of every performer that has played the same shit for 30 years. There's no way you can't play it. So now you've got to play a 3-hour concert. Good luck trying to sneak something new in there. So yeah, I mean, it's still there. It's still relevant for sure, but it's a select few bands that have the staying power. I mean, Cinderella is an example I like to use. I think Tom Kiefer is a fantastic musician. He went through some crazy bullshit with a nasty bout of throat cancer that literally killed his career for a few years. He came back. He couldn't hit the high notes. So he worked on his voice. Now he can hit them again. So Cinderella still plays. Tom Kiefer still plays. And Tom Kiefer plays Cinderella songs because now there's a licensing issue. But it's still good, right? He still does a good job. But the draw, for instance, he's not playing stadiums. He's playing small venues, which honestly, as a music fan, I hate large venues. I fucking will never, ever in my life again go to a show in a stadium. I won't. I don't give a fuck who it is. I won't go see a show in a stadium because it sucks. I saw Tom Petty in a stadium, and it was awesome, but I had good seats, and he was way the fuck out there, man, and I had to watch the show from a monitor. Right. I didn't pay $250 a ticket to watch TV, But when I go and I see Queensryche and they play here locally in town, and I can go see them at a casino with less than 500 people, and I can walk right up to the stage and watch Todd, the singer, who by the way is fucking legit, grab a fan's phone, take that phone and video himself and all of his band members with a fan's phone, and then give it back to him, and then fucking give him a dap or something. That's just fucking cool, and you can get right up on them, and they'll do their theatrics for you, and there's nothing like it, So the big shows are awesome. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I saw Pink Floyd and Roger Waters and all those guys. You're not going to see those guys in a small venue. It's physically impossible, But in at least those bands, they put on such a show. They have props and shit falls down from the ceiling and all kinds of stuff. But you're not going to get those carryovers from the 80s and 90s playing shows like that anymore. I mean, AC/DC will still play shows like that, but they're one of the very few. Guns N' Roses doesn't even play stadiums anymore. So it's the answer to your earlier question is, would it have the same impact? And I would say that I don't think it'd have the same impact, but I think that it would still have a big impact for sure, because there's still a level of talent that's there. And it did lead to other things. I just think at that time, the 80s and 90s was such a crowded time frame, because that was, I think, when music with MTV, everything came out of the woodwork. Everything was experimental. Everything was a transition point. And then when that kind of went away, when MTV pretty much became more about shows and less about music, people stopped giving a shit about what bands looked like and all that stuff. It just kind of went by the wayside. It became a non-factor. And a lot of those bands that were banking on an image versus their music, even if they were super talented, just they kind of lost relevance because people stopped looking at them.
Well, it's kind of funny because, like you said, as far as its place as a transition, and I think about this myself, like they were kind of the start of blurring the lines of where music came from, really.
Yeah.
because like we talked about, the beginning of the hair revolution, if you will, was the Sunset Strip. We all know Motley Crue.
Oh hell yeah.
L.A. Guns and bands like that were Sunset Strip bands. But like we mentioned, you had Bon Jovi, Cinderella, Skid Row, coming out of the woodwork, coming from the East Coast, and they were giving that quote unquote Sunset Strip sound from a completely different format of the world. And then of course it influenced other people. Like one of the people, I'm going to drop your jaw here for a minute. started bringing other bands around, like the Moscow hair metal band Gorky Park.
Gorky Park, yeah, I remember Gorky Park. They were fucking terrible. I'm sorry.
Their first album wasn't that bad. I mean, they had a nice ballad in "Try to Find Me," and
that's true.
And Bang wasn't too bad, but that cover of "My Generation" by The Who was horrible.
That was cringeworthy. Like at best, it was cringeworthy. But yeah, I mean that era. You even get back to you're right, the kind of the Soviet explosion in the States. I mean, it was all about, they were so much into like Levi's and blue jeans and kind of our culture, and they wanted to embrace our culture, and they really tried to make it accessible, I think, in the same way that, kind of like the Scorpions came out of Germany, and they really had a very American sound. You wouldn't have listened to them singing and be like, wow, this is a great German band, you just wouldn't have, except with Balls to the Wall. They were kind of on that verge of almost being hair metal, but they just kind of went a little bit more harder edge. But they were all glammed up with their fucking spandex and their tight pants and all that kind of stuff. So, but Gorky Park, man, I'd forgotten all about those guys.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna go buy that album now.
Good luck finding it.
Good luck finding it. Yeah, I'll import it from Russia.
But I mean, it was kind of like the first era that kind of blurred that line. Like, even rap during the time was East Coast, West Coast, and everything else. But the rock scene, particularly the glam rock scene, the line blurred. Where it was it was glam rock. It didn't matter if it was a British band, a Russian band, a German band. They were glam rock. It wasn't East Coast rap, West Coast rap. It wasn't Seattle grunge. It wasn't, Yeah,
no, it's true. It was about the style, not about the region.
And so that definitely was a transition. But one of the biggest things that I think came from glam rock, and I even attributed it to myself. Like when I started off the show, I asked you about influences to your music. To give you an example, some of my influences as a songwriter, because I'm a singer-songwriter mainly, is like I could point out, and my shit's eclectic, okay? So, of course, there's Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails.
I love that word.
Yeah, Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, and Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, and I draw influences from James Hetfield and Metallica, and one of my all-time influences is Jim Morrison of The Doors. But I find myself also drawn to Sebastian Bach and Dave Salvo. I find myself drawn to the writing styles of like Jack Russell, like I said, the House of Broken Love. Sometimes it's not just the body of work, but just one particular song that songwriter grabbed for me, and 9 times out of 10, it was some glam song that somebody forgot about.
You mentioned Sebastian and Snake, and I think that first Skid Row album was really heavy. I mean, the guitars on that were so good, and Youth Gone Wild, I think, became kind of the new anthem for the glam movement when they came out, and Sweet Little Sister was my favorite song off that. Because it was just a nasty song, right? It was just such a fucking wow. But yeah, I mean, those were great songs. I think that they had something above a lot of those bands. So I can see why that you would have taken inspiration from that, because Skid Row was different at that time. Even among that style, they really stood out. They were the new kids on the block in the glam scene when they came out. They fucking hit it hard when they came out. And everybody wanted to look like Sebastian Bach. All the chicks just lost their shit over this guy. And I remember thinking, why do you like a dude that looks like a girl? As a Sebastian Bach, he had the fucking pipes, though, man. That guy's range was fucking insane.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, he was so fucking skinny. Like you watched the Wembley Stadium concert, Skid Row at Wembley Stadium. I mean, if he turned sideways and stick his tongue out, it looks like a zipper. But I mean,
yeah, right.
A zipper with hair. But I mean, Sebastian, yeah, was the chops, and it's funny because my tag team in pro wrestling was Youth Gone Wild, named after the song. We used the song as
crazy.
our entrance. It definitely was, but it's kind of funny because you say the first album was really, really heavy. The only thing I got to disagree with is it was heavy for glam of the time, but it was, forgive this term here, but it was pussy compared to Slave to the Grind.
Yeah, it's really funny. From a sonic standpoint, you're right. For whatever reason, though, I couldn't pick up on it, and even when I was still into it, Slave to the Grind, it was slower, and the guitars were like sludgier, and they had more riffs versus more licks.
Right.
So it's definitely a heavier album than the debut album, but it didn't have the same impact on me as when that first one came out. But I mean, you're comparing that to like, Motley Crue and Cinderella, and at that time it was like Britney Fox was super popular.
Winger.
And so a lot of those bands, Winger. I'm not gonna lie, I had a couple fucking Winger albums.
Yeah.
Reb Beach, he's awesome. Kip Winger, he's a great ballerina, and he's kind of creeper.
I don't remember Winger's.
But,
I don't remember Winger's lead guitarist, but he could shred. Like he got
that's Reb Beach.
Was that Reb Beach?
Reb Beach.
That was his name. Okay.
That was their guitarist's name. Yeah. Their lead guitarist's name. And they actually have 3 guitarists because Kip also played guitar and bass. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, they were super. Winger was just they capitalized on it, but they never they were very short lived. Skid Row had pretty lasting presence on the scene up until the time they broke up. A few albums later, but yeah, man, it's Slave to the Grind. I can't believe I'm talking about this, by the way. It's so funny. Slave to the Grind was definitely a good album, but same thing, man. I don't know what it was, but like to this day, I can't even name a song off that album. It just didn't hold me, I think. And maybe because it was at that point, I had already started moving into a heavier direction. And I had kind of dropped that whole movement as I really wanted to identify more with like the thrash and the speed metal. I mean, I was gotten into Metallica pretty heavy at that point, and
right.
Testament and Slayer, and that was pretty much the beginning of that movement for me. But even into those times, I kind of still went back and I'd hear those songs on the radio, and I'd be like, yeah, dude, this was the shit back then.
Well, since you transitioned out of the glam rock into the thrash, and I guess for that era it was still kind of the new wave of British heavy metal, American new wave.
The American style, yeah, for sure. The early 90s was really, I think, the equivalent of the new wave of British heavy metal. You can call it the new wave of American glam metal.
Well, since you were going through that transition, it's a perfect transition for this question then. When you were transitioning into the thrash, into the death, into the black subgenres of metal, did you find yourself finding influences in those genres?
That's
glam?
A fantastic question. I think the answer is yes, because what was happening was, whether or not it was an influence is really hard to say, but you could definitely hear telltale signs. And a prime example of that is that bands like Metallica still had ballads, right? They had like, One, of course, which is actually the song that put Metallica on the mainstream map. Mm-hmm. And it was the lightest song they'd ever done. Although, for all intents and purposes, that's a heavy-ass fucking song, right. Especially, as it progressed past the clean vocals. And then, you had Fade to Black from Ride the Lightning, which had the clean vocals. And then, Testament, they had their ballads. In fact, they had a song, it was just called The Ballad. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those thrash bands, especially in the early days, as they were kind of getting heavier and heavier, they were struggling now with that, I want to be heavy, but I really need to get something that'll get me on the radio. And So I'm not going to go so far as to say that those bands wrote sellout songs, because they're good songs and they still had thrash elements. But I think that they were struggling to find out, hey, who is my audience? Is my audience going to be the diehard thrashers, or is my audience going to be the crossovers that are just now finding my stuff and they don't really know where they want to go with it? So I would say that those influences and relics were definitely there. I don't know if I'd say that it really went too far past that early, late 80s, early 90s, maybe into the early 2000s, as some of the bands that stayed in that thrash genre still kind of had those elements. But when you start getting into, the different, like death metal, for instance, that influence is pretty much all but wiped away. Although you can see that some of the guitar virtuosos that ended up into those bands that were using really advanced technical riffs, because these guys came from Guitar Institute and Musicians Institute, and they became really technically proficient, that you can see a lot of stuff that was very predominant, back in the days with Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, who ended up in Megadeth, but he was in Cacophony, and a lot of those guys that had a lot of, what the glam guys were doing. Paul Gilbert, for instance, is still super highly regarded, and he was kind of a rocky, glammy kind of a guy at the outset, and then now he's just a shredder, and so I think a lot of that stuff carried over as far as the lead guitarists go into metal, for sure. I don't think many other techniques carried over, but the lead guitar in metal, for those that are consider themselves to be accomplished metal musicians, still have a lot of those same techniques, because those were schooled techniques. CeCe DeVille was a fantastic fucking guitarist, and he's 100% self-taught, and you can hear a lot of the stuff that he played really was very metal. Outside of Poison, who knows what he could have done in a thrash band, but that motherfucker had some chops, and he could shred, and he could play awesome riffs, and he experimented with some down tunings and things like that, which kind of became the calling card of a lot of heavier music. Mm-hmm. So you can definitely hear kind of that element in some of the early metal. You could definitely get that carryover for sure.
Well, I think I slightly agree with you in the fact that it didn't carry over predominantly as strong as it did during the American wave of metal to modern day. But I do disagree a little bit. I think there is kind of a resurgence in some of the more commercial friendly quote unquote metal bands. Again, I may get shot for this, but I'm pointing at bands like Trivium or Avenged Sevenfold. With the ideas of Sinister Gates solos, the Avenged Sevenfold specifically, Sinister Gates solos, the harmonic guitars between him and Jackie Vengeance, and of course the vocal harmonies that the whole band comes in. That's very much 80s rock.
I'm gonna give you that. That is actually a very prime example of that coming back. Can't say I've ever really been too much into Avenged Sevenfold, so my knowledge of them is pretty minimal, but those elements are definitely there, and they definitely, I think, made an impact when the new metal bands became popular, your Disturbed and stuff like that kind of hit the scene, and then Avenged did come back in with a lot of retro elements. Mm-hmm. So yeah, dude, you nailed that one right on the head. That's pretty accurate.
That was something I was thinking about. I mean, maybe not so much in the underground or in the subgenres of metal, but at least in the commercialized metal that you still hear on the radios, I have started to notice some of the trends of that genre coming back.
Yeah, and bands like Dragon Force, for instance, they are kind of a hearkening back to those old, Cacophony days, where it's just really just lightning blistering speed kind of set behind a pretty medium paced rhythms, but some really complex riffing though. And I think Dragon Force is one of those bands that not a lot of people really know them by name, but then when you hear one of their songs, you go, I know that song. And they are very reminiscent of some of that era as far as the guitar solos and some of the movements go, for sure.
It's funny, whenever you mention Dragon Force, the first thought that ever comes to my mind when I listen to them is this is Iron Maiden with the speed turned up.
Yeah, right.
I hear a lot of Maiden influence in Dragon Force, especially in the song "Valley of the Damned."
Yeah.
When
I think of Dragon Force, I think of Guitar Hero and Rock Band because I spent many years working for GameStop selling those games, and I don't remember if it was Rock Band. I think it was Rock Band 4 maybe, but there was a Dragon Force song on there, and like that was the mark of if you could master that song is if you could play Dragon Force on hard, and fuck no, I could never even get close to that.
But it's kind of funny you mentioned that because that was going to be one of the questions I was going to throw out there too. Do you think video games have helped the resurgence of the '80s hair scene and maybe taken it out of the obscurity of that was just an '80s fan with gimmick clothing, and brought new fans in, playing the video games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, and happening to jam out to Living on a Prayer or Girls.
Oh,
Girls.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because you know what? I don't. Here's the cool thing about like Guitar Hero, for instance, which was predated Rock Band, but you would play that game and you found yourself liking every goddamn song on that game, regardless of what you grew up listening to, because now it was part of an experience that you had to master, and you had that I'm playing this song, and you had the setting at this stadium, and then when Guitar Hero World Tour came out and they introduced the drum element, and of course Rock Band was in the game by this point, and now you had two competing companies, then it became who can I license? Who can I out-license these guys with? And all tons of bands from like the 80s and 90s ended up on those games. And it wasn't just that era, of course. You ended up with some classic rock stuff. Like Tommy was on there as a song to play. You had like Police, Sting songs on there, which was super badass. Synchronicity 2, which I thought was one of my favorite songs to play on Guitar Hero. Yeah, and of course Dragon Force, and tons of cool bands like ended up on there. And so I credit that particular movement in games for really introducing people, especially younger crowds, to bands that were around before they were born, and then them getting new light. And I think it's to kind of mark that even more so. One of the designers of Guitar Hero 3 was a gentleman named Cragen Lum, who plays currently. He's in Heathen. He played in Exodus for a while. He worked for Activision. He was a game developer. He did Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam. He worked on a couple of racing games, and Cragen is fucking fantastic. And his old bands, Prototype, also had songs on there, and he became quite well known for that. And so stuff like that, you have musicians who are actually developing some of these games. Huge impact on the stuff, not only the stuff that was chosen, but how the games themselves played out and made you feel like there was an experience. And now you have an experience to tie in to the sonic experience. It's the perfect matching of audio and visual. And to this day, those are probably among my favorite games ever.
There was also Rocksmith, where you actually plugged in your real guitar to.
And that's when you realize that all that work you put into fucking Guitar Hero didn't mean dick.
Yeah.
Because you realize that you can't play guitar, fool. You were hitting 4 buttons, and it was a rhythm game, and it was timing based. Mm-hmm. And then you buy Rocksmith. But here's a funny story about Rocksmith. I got to prototype test Rocksmith before it launched.
Oh, nice.
Which was super badass. And I was at a conference for GameStop, and I met the developers, and they gave me a locked copy to take home with me and give them feedback on. And they also interviewed me at the show about what I thought about it, because they had a guitar there, they had a Les Paul there, and I plugged it in, and they took me through all the steps on hey, here, can you play guitar? I was like, yeah, I can play guitar. And they're like, how good are you? I'm like, I'm all right. And so they tailored the game to my skill level, and they just turned it on and said, here, go, see what you can do. And it was really cool. Nice. So I really liked that aspect of it, but I watched people try to play Rocksmith, and it was an epic fail, and it never really did that well.
Which is really a shame because it was set on a premise of like playing a video game but learning to play guitar. It seemed like a good aid. It's really sad that
you know why it failed, because people bypassed the training element and they went straight to, I just want to fucking play the songs like Guitar Hero. So the training element in there, I went through it even as somebody who already knew how to play. I was like, this is really cool. This is really in depth. And it did what it said it was going to do. People just didn't do it. They didn't go there with it. And I was like, you guys you're missing the whole point. If you want to play fucking Guitar Hero, go play Guitar Hero, you know?
Right.
But if you want to play Rocksmith, this is designed first and foremost as an interactive instruction, system, and people just, for whatever reason, they just didn't buy into that, and it really kind of made me sad because the game tanked. It just didn't do well.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
But it leads me to the final thing that for this episode, we'll end it on this. Since we spent so much time on the glam rock scene, and I promise not every episode's going to be glam rock. It's just this one happened to be. But here we are in 2020, the turmoilish 2020. Thinking back on glam rock and its influence, its steps from the 1980s to arguably 1990 Blage, where it finally lost its mainstream appeal. It has held a lot of hatred from other fan bases of music, including the metal genre.
Yeah.
Of course, it's had many names: hairband, butt rock. Does it deserve its hate?
Oh, listen, I've been on both sides of this spectrum. It's kind of a genre that I love to hate, I guess I always say. Does it deserve its hate? I think there are bands out there that came in thinking that they were all that, and they were epic fails, And so, yeah, I think that there are specific bands that were just bad. They're just terrible, and they just, they I don't know. Mm-hmm. But as far as, I guess I'm of the opinion now that even though glam is super easy to make fun of, and trust me, I've done it. There's something that if you grew up listening to it, even for a small fraction of time, a lot of those songs are timeless, and you don't have to like them. But a mark of a good song is if you can hear that song and then you can sing that song, or you can hum the tune to that song. And there's a lot of songs from that era that are still relevant today. So again, if you can get past the imagery, you probably, and the labels, because it got labeled a lot of different stuff. I mean, butt rock was always my favorite, and I got called a butt rocker a lot when I was a kid. These fucking butt rockers, Mm-hmm. I never got called like a glammy boy or anything like that. It was always, you're a fucking butt rocker. And I'm wearing my Skid Row shirts and stuff like that. Even I had a Warrant shirt, Mm-hmm. And Warrant, man, I'm sorry, dude. Those guys were terrible. As much as I wanted to like them, and I really tried, they provided that they were the right place, the right time, had the image, and I bought into it. And then I was like, wow, this is just really fucking bad, So I don't think it's worth the hate that it gets, but I understand the hate that it gets, because the hate comes from the imagery, right? The hate comes from, kind of how they were classified as, maybe they were guys that they didn't seem masculine. They didn't seem like they were singing manly songs, and people criticized it like, dude, they're just trying to get chicks, but who wasn't,
right.
It was an era, I think, that at its time when it happened, and I like to go back to Dee Snider, he really was trying to do something extreme and different. David Bowie did the same thing. He tried to kind of go along those same lines. It was different. It was definitely a very British flavor and maybe not metal. It was very glam, Ziggy Stardust, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Iggy Pop, had that kind of element to him too, Mm-hmm. So I just think that it's not deserving of the hate that it gets, and the hate that it gets is in my opinion, mostly based off the fact that people remember what those people look like, and that's really it's just so easy to make fun of it. I mean, if you watch a video now, you look at the look with the cat dragged in cover, you're gonna laugh because that cover's fucking retarded.
Oh, they were hot
it's
chicks.
Yeah, it's crazy. You look at the early Motley Crue stuff, how could you not make fun of it now? But back then, it was extreme. So if you were around back then, at some point you looked at that and said, wow, this is so different. This is so out there. This is so rebellious. This is so anti-system. This is what I want to be because it's just blowing people's minds, good or bad. It provided that sense of individuality. I think at some point when it started, I think that's really what it was going for. And then just like any other scene, people capitalized on it and the scene became saturated and then it died out, So, I guess whether or not you love grunge or hate it, you can basically thank grunge for killing glam.
Right.
It's, so I think that people that are musicians are way more open-minded to it. People that are not musicians, it's really fucking easy to hate on it. So, because, at least if you're a musician, you can look at a certain element and maybe respect it or maybe see what they're trying to accomplish. And then you look at a lot of those guys now and even a lot of those dudes they're into heavier shit themselves, so you look back and go, I did this for a while and now I don't do this anymore. So I don't know, who knows, in 20 years, I'll look back on my death metal phase and I'll be like, man, look what a pussy I was. Death metal and Satan and all that really pussy shit.
Well, see, I'm gonna slightly disagree with you with the Warrant thing.
Okay.
I agree the band itself was garbage.
Yeah.
But Janie Lane was a great songwriter. He was a great
he was a good performer and he's a cool dude.
But God rest him. But that's the only thing I had to argue. It's like, wait a minute, Janie was hot. The rest of the band, but Janie was hot. But
I had that dirty, rotten, filthy, stinking rich T-shirt with the big fat guy that was covered in money. I had that T-shirt and I thought it was so cool.
But I don't think glam rock deserves. Damn it! Just completely destroyed my point I'm about to make. I don't think it deserves the hate and discredit that it gets. If I call anything for glam rock for modern day, I call it a great gateway drug.
Sure.
For people who don't listen to hard rock, heavy metal, and you want to experience it, but you don't want to automatically get slammed in the face with somebody like Cannibal Corpse. Perfect example. My kids grew up with their mother, and their mother had them listening to, out here in Philadelphia, it's Q102, but, basically the hip hop R&B crap that they call music nowadays. And, I don't care. My show, I can say it. It's crap. But, and they were all about it. And of course they were about Hannah Montana and all that shit too. And, sure. I started introducing them to metal, and they didn't get Ozzy and they didn't get Metallica yet because it was just a little too heavy for them. But when I introduced them to Bon Jovi, to Poison, where there's kind of a dance beat to it, but at the same time, they start hearing the actual musicianship that was in the music. And again, like you said, it's not like they were looking at the album covers or whatever.
Right.
They started gaining an appreciation for rock and metal through that. The same way as like myself, I gained an appreciation for hard rock and heavy metal because my mother and grandmother were teaching me fucking Everly Brothers and the Beach Boys and Elvis Presley. It was a great. I think glam rock is a great gateway step into a larger music scene for people who have not grown up with that scene to begin with. So
yeah,
I think that's its main legacy and relevance in today's societies. I think it definitely bridges the gap between people who prefer the dance, the club, the beat, and the people who prefer the mosh, the metal, the Satan. You have that transition to allow you to discover a larger world.
Yeah, for sure.
Musically. Mike, I had an absolute blast sitting here bullshitting with you about music. I hope you enjoyed this one.
Oh, thank you, brother. This went down a lot of rabbit holes that I didn't expect. So, yeah, I'm always nostalgic about all the eras of music. So, it's been an honor to come on and hang out with you and break the fourth wall and carry on with a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for inviting me out, and I'm looking forward to turn the tables on you here in a couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, I know I got it coming, but I'll definitely have you back on, especially on In the Pit, because I as we were talking, I already had two other topics come to my head. One of which I thought you might appreciate, being a thrash guy, is who's the better vocalist for Anthrax, Joey or John Bush?
We'll save that one.
There you go. The other one I'll keep to myself.
Nice.
Guys, if you enjoyed this episode and, of course, Breaking the Fourth Wall, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Check out all the other great podcasts around the Miss Entertainment. And, of course, if you prefer us in audio-only format, we got you covered. Check us out on Anchor.fm, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever quality podcasts can be heard. And one more time, Mr. Mike, tell them where they can find you.
You can find Misery Point Radio on all of those same platforms where you can find Realm of the Mist and all that awesomeness. Check it out on YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, you name it. And of course, feel free to shoot me an email anytime, miserypointradio@gmail.com. If you got questions, comments, you want to really dive deep into more hair metal, you want to call me names because I made fun of Warrant, by all means, man, call me out. I'll go down that rabbit hole with you.
I'm debating, like, this is going to be connected to Breaking the Fourth Wall, but I'm debating if I'm not going to release it as an individual episode as well for In the Pit. And I know we're going to catch so much flack in the comments section. How can you guys
Hey, if you want to question my musical credibility, I'll fucking take you on.
Yeah, you can question mine, and I can't argue it. But yeah, go ahead, fight him. I've learned in the hour and a half I've been sitting here talking to him that this guy's a fucking metal encyclopedia. Good luck. Guys, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next In the Pit!
Yeah!
Hey guys, it's Chris from Realm of the Mist Entertainment. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Check out all the other great podcasts that can be found on Realm of the Mist Entertainment's YouTube channel or our sister channel, Sounds Dicey Gaming, for all your tabletop needs. And if you prefer your podcasts in audio-only format, check out Realm of the Mist Entertainment on Anchor.fm, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever quality podcasts can be heard. To our Patreon supporters, we thank you very, very much. And if you're interested in being a Patreon supporter, please go over to patreon.com/Realm of the Mist. And just $1 a month gives you exclusive content and helps our channel out greatly. Guys, again, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode.